Today on With First Pick, summer scouting continues with an early look at the tight end class for 2026. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's former Titans GM Ran Carthon. This is episode 277. And Ran, getting closer every single day, 282 days until the 2026 NFL Draft. That never gets old. All right, in case you missed it, we've already hit our QBs, wide receivers, and running backs, the top players in the draft class at those positions. You can check that out in the old podcast feed. This week, we'll finish up the offense with the offensive line, and then next week, we'll turn our attention to the defense. But for now, Ran, we're talking about tight ends. And I went back and did some digging, and I'll share with you some fun facts. Since 2010, 110 tight ends have been drafted. 9% of those have been drafted in the first round. The bulk of those drafted comes in rounds 3 and 4. And when you look back by draft class at those that have been most productive, not a lot of first-round picks. Going back to 2010, Brock Bowers, Kyle Pitts, T.J. Hockenson, Eric Ebron, in their respective draft classes were first-round picks who have been most productive if you look at, say, approximate value, which is a metric that Pro Football Reference uses. But then you have guys like Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, some guy named George Kittle, who you just spoke with yesterday. So before we get going, I want to ask you this. Do we overvalue NFL teams and media like first-round picks on tight ends? Because it feels like more than any other position except for maybe running back, you can get value well into day 2 and even day 3.
I don't know if overvalue is the correct word. Probably more so just finding guys that fit your scheme so well that you can get the most out of. Now, to take it a step further, I'd be interested in seeing how the production matches with the coaching staff, or if there's coaching staff changes, right? Because some of these tight ends are drafted to play in certain systems, and then a year or two in the line, the head coach is removed or the GM is removed, and now they're in a system that they don't fit. So I'd be interested to see some of that as well. But to your point, as I was watching these guys, I was thinking about guys that have gone in rounds and where I see their ability and measuring those guys up to that. But, you know, to your point, Travis Kelce was a 3rd-round pick. You mentioned George Kittle, you know, was a 5th-round pick. Zach Ertz was a 2nd-round pick. So you can find value at multiple levels at this position.
All right, before we move forward, Producer Sharon, let's look at the 2024 tight end rankings from With the First Pick. Summer scouting from 12 months ago. And some names you recognize and some names you might not recognize. Colston Loveland, we got that one. That was a layup. He was the first tight end drafted. Oscar Delp returned to Georgia, was underutilized at times at Georgia last season, which seems kind of weird because they didn't have a ton of playmakers offensively in the pass game. Mitchell Evans was drafted in the 5th round out of Notre Dame. He was coming off that injury a year ago. Luke Lachey out of Iowa. No surprise there, pretty good blocking tight end. Jake Brainstool out of Clemson went undrafted. He was a little undersized. I was slightly surprised he didn't get drafted. And ran a name you may not see there. He ended up being 6th on our list. Went back and checked. Some young man named Tyler Warren. And I don't know, I haven't asked you, if you had seen Tyler Warren going into the fall, had paid attention to him. But I thought, and I talked to some scouts that thought he was going to be a late day 2, early day 3 pick until he absolutely exploded. So I'll ask you this. How much can you help yourself with a really good season? Because Tyler Warren went from not necessarily off the radar, but he went from strictly day 2-ish, day 3 guy to top 32 guy without question.
Oh, without question, you can help yourself. I mean, that's just the name of the game. People get the chance to see you different. And I think Tyler Warren helped himself by showing his versatility. You know, I think a lot of people appreciated his game as a wide tight end, a big dude that could block in line. And people don't value that as much anymore. But then seeing him play multiple positions, seeing him, you know, stretch the seams and catch balls and show his body control and his catch radius, I think it really helped him. So, you know, it's cool that you're holding yourself accountable, putting up your list from last year and not hiding it, because most would. But it shows that this thing can change and how much a fall can help you.
Yeah, true that. There's nothing more humbling than looking at your rankings from a year ago as you go into next year's rankings. All right, let's look at our rankings for this year's class individually, yours and mine, for the tight end position. And those are our running backs here. But in terms of the tight ends, and I have them here, we had Kenyon Sadiq. Both of us liked him at Oregon as our top guy. We both had Max Klare at Ohio State, number 2. He's a transfer from Purdue. And then things get interesting. We both had Eli Stowers from Vandy and Jack Endries from Texas. And then finally, I had Luke Hasz from Ole Miss, and we'll talk about him in a second. You had Joe Royer from Cincinnati at number 5 in your list. So we'll see what this list looks like 12 months from now, but I think it's a good starting point. I'll just say this, and you tell me if you agree. I think Kenyon Sadiq is going to be the real thing. We'll talk about him as we get through the show. It doesn't feel like a situation where he's going to slip into round 7, for example. Am I at least safe in saying that?
Oh, absolutely. I agree 1,000%. Excited to see him play.
Okay, good. Let's start with some positives here. Okay, so number 5 on our list collectively, the consensus with the first pick rankings here. Luke Hasz out of Ole Miss, and got a little glimpse of him last year. 6'3", 241. And one of the other things I wanted to mention, I went back and looked, 2010 to 2015, tight ends typically weigh between 245 and 255. They get lighter each and every year, it feels like, because as you've talked about before, Rand, we're seeing a little bit more of the move tight end situation. And all these guys we were talking about are sub 250 unofficially. We'll see what they end up weighing once we get to the pre-draft process. Luke played primarily in line. Arkansas transfer, played there in 23 and 24. He'll be at Ole Miss this year. Has some track background. I won't mention details because I know you and producer Sharon get particular about how fast someone is. His twin brother played it at Arkansas as well as a DB. No drops last year on 32 targets. The quarterback play with Taylor Green was hit or miss. I think that's a polite way to put it. He's going to be catching passes from Austin Simmons this year, the left-hander who flamethrower came into that Georgia game. With a lot of fun to watch. But in terms of what I saw there, smooth hands catcher. I thought he's a little stiff at times in and out of breaks, runs well, and he will absolutely run over defensive backs in space. He did it countless times when I was watching the tape. And one of the things that differentiates him a little bit from the other tight ends in this class, from at least the ones I've seen so far, he will block. And even at 241, he feels like he's 250, 255 as a blocker, takes it seriously, and I appreciated that part of his game as well, because that's one less thing you have to teach, at least maybe to the degree of some of these other tight ends, at the next level. What are your thoughts on Lucas Hasz?
He was a little bit further down on my list. I know we have him at number 5 on my personal list of the 8 tight ends that I watched. He was number 7. Like you, I saw a guy that wasn't overly athletic. I didn't think he was going to be able to separate and create separation on his own, specifically laterally because of the stiffness. But he caught the ball well. And so, although he didn't fire me up, and I try to take into account the quarterback play at Arkansas being very inconsistent. I just didn't think his production or lack thereof warranted him to be in my top 5. And I think there are a bunch of guys that I like, and some that don't have the production, but they have so much physical ability in their body, and with more opportunity, I think they'll ascend. So he was a little bit further down for me. But again, he's a guy that, I think will probably start his career as a number 3 tight end. And there are going to be, various roles for him. The blocking will help him. But at 6'3", 240 something, you're not going to be able to put him in line against some of these defensive ends, outside linebackers, and expect him to capture the edge for you.
We'll see, because I'm all in on blocking Mr. Hasz here. Interesting note, though, and I'll ask you this in a moment so you can think about it. I had Luke as a late 4th, early 5th round pick after watching this summer, with an opportunity to obviously improve. So I don't think he's a top 100 guy right now. My comp for him was actually Kylan Granson, who certainly didn't go in the first few rounds. Your number 5, Joe Royer out of Cincy, if you had to put a preliminary grade on him as we sit here in July, would he be a day 2 guy, or is he still day 3 combo right now?
I would say at the latest early day 3, because I do think he has some physical tools, athleticism, and movement skills that people will like, particularly in that 3rd round, and especially when you get late into the compensatory 3rd round pick, area. So I think that's the sweet spot for him, late 3, early 4.
And that's the thing. In the last 15 years, 60% of the tight ends drafted went in rounds 2, 3, and 4. And that feels like the sweet spot, because that's where you end up getting the most production. All right, one down with Luke Hasz, now headed to Ole Miss. That's going to be interesting to watch, see how he does there. When we come back, we're talking about a young man that was actually thinking about coming out last year, got invited to the Shrine Bowl, decided to return to Vanderbilt. Eli Stowers. We'll talk about him right after the break. Hey, Rand, we are back to talk tight ends. Got your Batman shirt on there. Producer Sharon trying to talk about Superman and Batman. He's not focused on the tight ends like we are. So we'll talk about we'll see what kind of superhero Eli Stowers is after we have our conversation about him. Tight end at Vanderbilt, another guy who on scales is not going to be Rob Gronkowski. 6'4", 235 unofficially. Played about 40% in line, more than half the time in the slot. Played a little bit outside. Took a couple snaps at quarterback. New Mexico State transfer. And also prior to that, played at Texas A&M. So he's been around a little bit in this NIL era. 100-meter hurdle guy. I don't know if you guys are hurdles, you and Sharon, but he can run the hurdles. 6A high jump champ in Texas in 2019. So there you go. If you're doing that in Texas, you're doing something. I'm not talking about Vermont. No disrespect to Vermont. He's in Texas balling out. So I wrote, when I wrote him up, I thought his athleticism flashed. I thought he's a little stiff in and out of breaks, but he has some quick twitch ability. He can high point the ball. Played in that offense at Vandy that was so much fun to watch with Pavia and all the things they were able to do, including that win over Alabama last year. I thought he was still raw as a route runner, but he does have a feel for when to settle in the zones, and then he can stride out, and we saw that in that Alabama game. So a lot to like in terms of where I had him graded. I have him as a day 3 guy right now. Maybe that's not as high on him as some other people should be, but I want to see how 2025 unfolds. Arrow's pointing up. I'm excited about that. But right now, he was my tight end 5 on my list. What do you think about Eli Stowers?
For starters, he was tight end 3 for me. I saw him as an F only. You know, you mentioned earlier about he doesn't have the Rob Gronkowski size, but I see this guy as just an athletic F tight end. And even when he was in line, he was kind of in a wing position, and they kept him on the move, use him on sifts, and sifts are the backside cutoffs. And so I liked his athleticism. I liked his speed. I like his ability to run after the catch, because you could see, you know, some of his speed and then his open field run skills. I was actually at the Bama game last year, and he had a really good game there. And as you can see on the screen right now, he has the production to match: 49 catches, 638. My one issue with him was the consistency of the blocking. I thought he was an average blocker, which at this point, if you're an F tight end, you really don't expect these guys to be dominant blockers. But I think the issue he's going to have at the next level is I don't think the coaches are going to trust to have him out there on the field full time, which I think is going to, affect a lot of these guys, because, it just is what it is. You got to be able to block some in this league. And if you can't block, you got to be dynamic, as an F tight end, as a receiving tight end. And although I think he's good, I don't see him as quite being dynamic. And so I just think he's going to, I think he'll be a day 2 pick, again in that 3rd round, because I think he's going to test well. And I think he's going to, light up the charts at the Combine, Pro Day, whatever have you. And because of that, too, I see him as early as a 2-phase special teams guy. And I'm sure they'll be able to use him because he has the size, he has the athleticism, and he can run to be a matchup guy. But I don't see him being, this dynamic special teams player either. But still, number 3 on my list is tight end 3.
All right, my comp, and you can, thumbs up or thumbs down it was Gerald Everett, because of the athleticism and the size. I don't know if he's quite as athletic as Gerald Everett, and we'll find out together. So I want to get your thoughts on that, and also your thoughts on the conversations in the draft room once you get around to watching these guys, January, February, March. If you know that he's not a great blocker, and you know he's going to be an F tight end in your scheme, what is the tight end coach saying in these meetings, and what is the OC saying in terms of how high we want to take someone if we understand that he has limitations in half the plays we run if they're running plays?
Not a fan of the Gerald Everett comp. I think Gerald Everett, they're a little different athletes. I think Gerald Everett had better change of direction, being able to stick his foot in the ground, create separation. Those are things that he did really well. I think Eli Stowers probably catches it more consistently than Gerald Everett, because Gerald would have concentration drops. But to answer your other question, in the draft room, again, it comes down to if you're going to be an F-only tight end, that's fine. I mean, that's what the game is making. They're converting these big receivers into tight ends. But if you're going to be F-only and you're going to be taken high, you have to be dynamic. Take, for instance, Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts was an okay blocker at best. He got in the way. He did what he was supposed to do. You weren't going to run power behind Kyle Pitts at Florida. But when you needed a play in the passing game, you used him as a mismatch, as a guy that you can put on, create matches for him against safeties and linebackers, and he would win 100% of the time. And so you have to have that type of ability to be a mismatch and be dynamic if you're going to be an F-only tight end.
By the way, I thank you for very politely disagreeing with my comp. Your predecessor was very angry about it and made me feel not great about myself. So, hey, we're making progress. We can all be a kinder, gentler space here. Hey, let me ask you about this. You did draft Chick correct?
No, I came the year after they drafted
Oh,
Chick.
came the year after him. Okay, because he's a high-end athlete coming out of college, and I think he's a little undersized. He's not 6'5". He's not. I don't think he's 250. He may be. But what were the plans in terms of how to get the most out of him athletically? Because the wide receivers weren't as athletic as perhaps you wanted them to be by the time you arrived there, and Chick provided that in the middle of the seam there. So I'm trying to get a sense of those types of tight end body types and how you use them, because it feels like they're still scratching the surface on what Chick should be able to do in Tennessee.
No, Chick's a good athlete. Chick can run, and I think the underrated part of Chick's game is that he can block. He can actually block. You can put him on, on the move. You can create, different looks. You can put him in the backfield, line him up at fullback. You can put him in that wing position, use him on sifts, and you can put him in line, and he'll fight and scrap. And there are going to be times where he gets overpowered, and that's a mom and dad issue and not more so as an effort. And to me, again, just like we talked about with the running backs, you just have to show the fight and the want to. And these tight end coaches, I'm thinking about a guy like John Embry. If you show him, who's the tight end coach in Miami, if you show him that you got the tools and that you're going to scrap and fight, then he'll get your technique right and to give you even more of a chance to win. I mean, let's call it, we spoke about it briefly. I interviewed George Kittle yesterday. George probably weighs on a good day between 235 and 238, and he's considered the best blocking tight end in the league. So a lot of it is just your mentality.
I'll ask you this quickly. I don't know if you remember George coming out in 2017, but why was he a fifth-round pick? Is that because the offense didn't necessarily show at Iowa what he was going to be capable of? Was he stiff? Like, what were the reasons that George didn't go top 10, which is what he should have been in retrospect?
I'll just say this one thing, because I know we got to cut the break here. Their starting quarterback only threw for 1,800 yards that year.
All right. We'll leave it at that. Hey, man, you go to Iowa, you're going to be a blocking tight end. You might not catch every pass you want to catch, but you'll be a blocking tight end. Worked out okay for him and Sam Laporta as well. All right. Let's take another quick break here. When we come back, we went to number 3 in our list. A little spoiler alert. Jack Endries now at Texas. And you can think about this in the break, Ran. My comp for him is Sam Laporta, so you can make your face in the break, and we'll come out of the break looking at your face, and we'll talk about Jack Endries, number 3 on our list, right after this break. All right, Ran, we're up to number 3 in our list of tight ends with first pick summer scouting consensus. Jack Endries, now of Texas. He was at Cal, and I haven't been following Cal football closely over the summer, but they lost one of the best quarterbacks in the country, in Fernando Mendoza. They lost one of the most productive tight ends in the country, in Jack Endries, who's now made his way to Texas. 6'4", 240 unofficially, 65 targets last season, 641 yards, 1 drop. That gets my attention. No fumbles. That also gets my attention. Played baseball and basketball in high school. And I just like to see how athletic these young men are when they get to college. And in terms of what I thought about him, I thought he was incredibly efficient in terms of stretching the field. They use him a lot in tunnel screens, and I thought he could take a 5-yard gain and make it into a 15-yard game. Create a separation down the field. If you watch that Miami touchdown, he's running away from defensive backs. So it feels like if you're catching passes from Arch Manning and a Steve Sarkisian offense, you're setting yourself up for success at the next level. So I understand why you might leave Berkeley to make your way to Austin. But I think this young man has a chance to put up some huge numbers in 2025 because of not only his, as you say, mom and dad God-given gifts, but also with the program he's now going to be a part of in the University of Texas.
Nah, he's another guy I'm kind of really interested to watch just because, like you said, I mean, I respect the production at Cal, considering. But like you said, when you go back and you're watching these guys and you see that Cal has a guy that we're talking about in the top 5 at quarterbacks, they have a guy that could have been in the argument as had top 5 in the running back category who's transferred. And now this guy, there was a ton of talent there. You just wonder why it didn't equal wins. out there. And we see here on the graphic that picture they just showed was him pulling away in that Miami game. That's where you really saw this guy's speed. So I'm excited to see him in this Texas offense. Now I'm going to ask you a question for once, because I thought about this as I was watching him. How would you compare Jack Endries to Helm that just left Texas that the Titans drafted, I believe, in the 4th round?
So Helm played bigger. Like Helm may have weighed 250-ish or so. I know you liked Helm a lot as well. He ran a 4.8, but that's because he had turned his ankle and still ran anyway at the combine. I loved Helm coming out, and I thought he was incredibly important to making life easier for Quinn Ewers in the middle of the field. That Michigan game sticks out in my mind in particular. I like Helm a little better, Gunnar Helm a little better, and I thought he should have been a top 75 guy. Jack Endries, I think, has a chance to be a day 2 guy, but I know what Gunnar can do against the best players in the country. And look, we just talked about Endries being productive, but I want to see that week in and week out against SEC competition. That's a good question. Where were you on Helm versus Endries?
And so that was my point. Like my point, even asking that question for me was I saw Gunnar Helm as being better, better player than Endries, right? And Gunnar Helm, whether it was due to the ankle injury or whatever the case may be, he went in the 4th round. He was a day 3 pick. So that's kind of where I started Jack Endries for me, is on day 3, being a day 3 pick. Now, again, he can help himself out tremendously in the fall. We know, if you look at traditionally, and I hate to keep doing this to Arch because of the last name and the bloodlines, but if you look at every offense that his uncles, who have also played the same position, have been in, they have gotten great production out of their tight ends because they understand how to use the tight end position. And so you can expect him to probably put up equal numbers. But again, I saw Helm as being a little bit better. Saw Helm live against Vandy last year when Texas came to Vandy here in Nashville, excuse me. So I like this kid. I do think his calling card to me and what he's going to be able to hang his hat on is his hands and his catch rates and his ability to extend and pluck outside of his frame. And I do think he gives good effort, in the run game, and he's not afraid to put his face on people. I just saw too many instances where he fell off or, allowed his guy to, engage and then make the play late in the down. Again, that's effort. That's technique. That's fundamentals, which he will get better at the next level. But I still saw Gunnar Helm was a little bit better than him.
Hey, let me ask you this, as someone who's, been in Atlanta and St. Louis/LA and San Francisco and, of course, Tennessee. Are we seeing, and I mentioned Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay in particular, are we seeing more of a move to 2 and 3 tight ends? And I'm asking this question because all these guys now weigh 235 to 245, and you're going to have to start drafting more Darnell Washington types and have more 12 and 13 personnel out there if you want to run certain plays? Or are you just going to have to be an F tight end who blocks, or Puka Nacua who can come downhill and earhole a defensive end? Like, what's the thought process there when you're in these draft meetings? I know it's based on the offense you want to run, but are we seeing a situation where we have to draft 2 different type of tight ends now because they look so different, whether one's in line or whether one's out in the slot?
I mean, the easiest way to say it is you have to find the Y tight end however you can get them, because they're rare. There's not very many of them hanging around. I'm going to go back in the archive. A guy like Lee Smith, who came out of Marshall, I believe, he hung around the league for a long time just because he could block. And so the guys like Darnell Washington, who are big, who can block and can give you something in the passing game. I mean, shoot, look at Mercedes Lewis. Mercedes Lewis is my age, and he's still playing because he has a value as being a blocking tight end. And so you have to find these guys whichever way you can, and every offense is looking for one. You love to have one, but in the instance that you can't, you got to have multiple guys. You got to have – most teams carry 3 tight ends, and you have one on the practice squad, and usually you try to have one on the practice squad that you can develop into a blocking tight end. So you have that on your roster. But now, man, these offensive coordinators are so creative. They can find different ways to create angles for these tight ends and blocking on the move. You got receivers who aren't afraid to mix it up. I mean, hell, we used Trent Williams in the wing and put him in motion and had him do a kick out block against Green Bay one year in the playoffs. So there's so many different creative ways to get the edge captured for you. Doesn't always have to come from the tight end position.
Man, imagine being a cornerback, minding your own business, and they're going to bring Trent Williams out there to mess around with you while you're trying to do your job and outweigh you by 175 pounds or whatever it is. The other thing I wanted to bring up, speaking of sort of Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, Juwan Jennings almost blends the positions, right? He can play in the slot. He can block. He came out of college as a wide receiver. Is that a special case, or is that maybe the direction that some of these positionless players are now going, that you can do more than one thing? You don't have to be a 260-pound tight end or a 235-pound move tight end.
No, you got to get it done however you can get it done, and if you look at all those 49er receivers, they all block really well because they help block downfield and they take pride in it. The real guys take pride in blocking and being able to make things happen on the perimeter and downfield. And so you got to get it done. I'm going to challenge Sharon to see if he could pull that clip of Big Trent against Green Bay. So you could see that him actually lining up in the wing position, off the ball, going in motion and doing the kick out is one of the craziest things you'll see for a 300. And I'm going to be nice to you here, big fella, and 325-pound tackle.
And Jason Peters was a tight end coming out of college. I don't remember if Trent played another position as well. He probably did. He's so athletic. But I remember Jason Peters was a quote-unquote project, and clearly that worked out. He had a fantastic NFL career. All right, 3 down, 2 to go. And I'll ask you this quickly before we go to break. Tight end class this year compared to last year, which one feels deeper right now?
I'll say last year's class feels deeper right now because I think there was more high-end talent.
And there were 16 guys drafted in last year's draft class of the tight end position, rounds 1 through 7. When we come back, though, we'll talk about our 2 favorite guys, consensus with the first pick rankings at the tight end position. Max Klare next up. Purdue transfer now to Ohio State, defending national champs. We'll talk about Max right after this break. Max Klare was one of the only shows in town at Purdue last year offensively. He's now at Ohio State. His life should get a little bit easier, we would think. 6'4", 236 unofficially. Lined up 60% of the time in line, but he can play in the slot as well. And there's a lot to like about the way he played. 77 targets, had 5 games where he caught at least 75, had 75 receiving yards. I thought he was a long strider in space, huge catch radius. I wrote plus athleticism, gets in and out of breaks, and then he strides out in space, gets behind second-level defenders. He gets stressed the middle of the field with a seam route. A lot to like in terms of what he brings to Ohio State with, Jeremiah Smith. We've talked about Carnell Tate. This offense should continue to be explosive if they get the quarterback position right. Rand, what was your take on Max Klare? And I'll just tell you this, not to throw you off stride, though, but I saw a little Colston level in athleticism in Max's game. Is that a little too rich for you?
No, I'll do you one better and say that just his movement and the fluidity and ease of the movement reminded me a lot of Travis Kelce.
Oh,
okay. And because if you think about Kelce's game isn't quick, explosive, quick twitch movements. It's understanding how to attack leverages, how to lean and set up guys and do it all without wasted movement. And I saw this was how Max moved. Max, everything was smooth and fluid. And so you really see, and you hear this a lot, and I wrote it a lot in my notes, especially at the tight end position, is that you see the guys speed with the ball in their hands. Right, because they're trying to, extend the play downfield and make the explosive. But we're talking about a guy that was just, like I said, is an easy, loose mover that understood how to get open, that understood how to attack leverages, caught the ball really well. I hadn't heard of him before this summer scouting, and so coming off of it, if the guy that we're going to talk about at number 1, if he wasn't on the board, this would be the guy that I'd be most excited about watching. And like you mentioned, this offense that he's going in, he may not see a year where he's going to have 75 targets. He may not. But I think if you look at the totality of his production, I think it'll be higher from an efficiency standpoint. I think his yards per catch will probably increase. His touchdowns will probably increase. He just won't be the number one target in the passing game. But man, like he was fun to watch. And, he even had a Zach Ertz feel. And to me, just a guy that you're not going to look at as being this dynamic athlete, but next thing you know, this guy's gotten by you, and then you see the back of his jersey because he's running away from you scoring touchdowns.
Yeah, I did note he had some focus drops. I wanted to see him hauling a few more contested catches, but that was in the minority of the plays that I saw. I said he had yards after catch ability. He could run through arm tackles. He consistently made the first defender miss in space, and that's not something you typically talk about with an old school traditional tight end. The other thing, I'm double checking my notes here. We'll talk about Kenyon Sadiq in a second. But Max Klare was that far behind him. I have them both as high second-round picks right now. Maybe that's a little rich. We'll see. But do you think there's an opportunity that we see two tight ends in the first round 282 days from now?
No, I don't think so. I do, if I'm being honest. I think Sadiq is probably the only one that has a chance to go in the first round. Now, I could see Max Klare, definitely being a top 50 to top 60 pick. I could see that happening. But I just don't see right now where you're going to have, like this year, you're not going to have two tight ends going to top 20 picks or whatever it was.
Yeah, and here's the thing. If you look at last year's draft class, just from a few months ago here, Mason Taylor was a second-round pick, insane athleticism. Terrence Ferguson, who was Sadiq's teammate at Oregon last year, really good athlete, went 46 overall in the second round. Elijah Arroyo might end up being the best athlete in this group, another second-round pick. And then my guy, Rondé Gatson, not quite as fast, but he looks the part, even though he was 240-ish, 245. He was a fifth-round pick of the Chargers. So, while, I'm accused of falling in love with a lot of these players, you can't have 500 first-round picks. So at some point, guys get pushed around a little bit here, up and down the board. But I think to your larger point, Max Klare transferring to Ohio State, the production might not be what it was at Purdue, but it's probably gonna look a lot better. And let me ask you that, because you talked a little bit about George Kittle going to Iowa and playing with a quarterback that threw for 1,800 yards. Is it easier to evaluate a player at Purdue where the offense isn't nearly what it should be at, say, Ohio State, or going to an Ohio State where he gets a third of the targets? He might only get 30 targets next year, but you're playing in an offense that maybe makes it easier to translate what that looks like at the next level.
Man, I don't want this to sound crazy or arrogant. It depends on the evaluator, right?
Okay.
Because let's just keep it real. Not everybody can evaluate. That's not everybody's strong suit. And I think if you have ability, in one way or the other, whether you see them catch the ball or not on tape, true evaluators find a way to be able to judge whether a guy can catch the ball, whether that's going to see him in practice, seeing him in pregame, whatever that case may be. Fortunate enough for Max, he was able to show a lot on tape, at Purdue. And let's be real, like, he was the focal point at Purdue, but then you got to see him against top competition. And so you saw that. But then now you take it a step further from an evaluation standpoint. You put him in Ohio State's offense, and now you get to see what he's going to look like amongst other NFL players, how he's going to fit into an offense and balance out the offense, which is he has two NFL caliber receivers that he's playing with, and then now he's going to be the NFL caliber tight end, and how does he fit in that? So you get to see the full picture of Max Klare, and you get to see him you've seen him as a focal point at Purdue, and now you get to see him as a quote unquote role type player in Ohio State offense and how he can add value in that phase.
Yeah, let me ask you, go a little bit further down that road. And I was picking up what you're putting down when you said some people aren't good evaluators. I saw you staring extra hard at the camera, so I took that personally. But I want to ask you about Sam Laporta at Iowa, because, again, it was typical Iowa offense, but everyone and their brother seemed to understand that he was special on the 5,000 flats that he caught at Iowa, and didn't do a lot of other stuff, route running. And the other guy is a little different, Dawson Knox at Ole Miss, because he played with DK Metcalf and he played with A.J. Brown. And that offense, it's a little quirky compared to other offenses. In particular, do you remember evaluating those two guys and having trouble, or was it clear to you at some point that they have a chance to be second and third round picks, respectively?
No, I thought it was clear because you
Okay.
saw everything you needed to see. And I'll say this, there were a ton of people in the NFL community. Well, I won't say a ton, but there was a good bit of people in the NFL community that really love Sam Laporta. And I've had conversations with guys just this summer where we talking about Sam Laporta, where there were some arguments in some draft rooms about people wanting to take him in the first round and
Ooh.
having to be held off. And so those arguments happen. But again, we're talking about evaluators. And, in saying that, I want to give Brad Holmes his flowers in taking Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round when he did. And people raised eyebrows. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think, throughout his college career, never had more than 145 carries in a single season, but Brad saw what Jahmyr Gibbs could be. And there were other people that loved Jahmyr Gibbs, but had a later value, probably because he was a running back. But Brad saw it, didn't care what everyone else thought, and took him. And now look what he's doing in their system. He's one of the better young running backs in this league.
Yeah, not only drafted him, traded up to 12 to get him. Right after Bijan was drafted at 8, I believe, and he's been absolutely electric and only 195 or whatever he weighs. He's not 225. He just said that he's lined up more at wide receiver now. So you talk about versatility. We're talking about these tight ends that play inline and again play in the slot. Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the most versatile players on a roster. And the other thing, that same draft class, they took Jack Campbell, the linebacker, in the second round. And I remember folks saying, well, these aren't the needs that the Lions have. Well, the Lions won 15 games the subsequent year. So I think they sort of figured it out. But in terms of our guy here, Max Klare at Ohio State, excuse me, day 2 right now. We'll hold off judgment until he pulls a Tyler Warren and goes absolutely crazy. But he feels like a guy that can make his way into day 2, no problem, even if he has less production there. All right, Ran, 4 down, 1 to go. We've sort of hinted at who our number 1 is. And before we go to break, I'll just ask you this. Is Kenyon Sadiq a better athlete than former teammate Terrence Ferguson, who was the 46th overall pick of the Los Angeles Rams?
Short answer, yes.
Yeah, that's the right answer. All right, producer Sharon, we can take a break now because Rand got that one right. All right, when we come back, we'll talk Kenyon Sadiq out of Oregon, number 1 overall on our with the first pick consensus list, and we'll do that right after this. It's time for number 1, Rand. We both agree. Not even any real conversation about it. Kenyon Sadiq out of Oregon. You talked about it before the break. Better athlete than Terrence Ferguson, and Terrence Ferguson is a really good athlete, his former teammate at Oregon. And, you watch Terrence Ferguson last draft cycle, and you would see Sadiq flash time and time and time again. I started my notes with this. He's a special team standout, and I typically don't focus on special teams when I start the evaluation process of tight ends in particular. They had him lining up at quarterback. He would throw on extra points from quarterback, threw touchdowns twice on rollout plays. He took a fake punt from the up back position. So he can do a ton of things, and they use that athleticism in many different ways at Oregon. And it seems like he's tight end 1 now, and it's going to be a Brock Bowers situation where he's going to be tight end 1 throughout. I don't think he's going to be Brock Bowers to get drafted 13th overall and play like Brock Bowers did as a rookie. But I think I'll ask you this. I'll double down. Is he a better athlete than Brock Bowers?
I would say no, just because I thought Brock Bowers has some special stuff, and not saying that Kenyon doesn't, but you just in terms of being twitchy, explosive, fluid, change of direction, I thought Bowers had all of it. And like I said, Kenyon is a dynamic athlete in his own right. I just thought Brock Bowers was probably a little bit better because I think he's also faster. And I don't know, did Brock run? I can't remember if he ran or not. But I would have thought he would have been, a 4.4 guy, a high 4.4 guy coming out. But man, this guy here, he's got some special traits. And it's funny that you mentioned the special teams thing because I ended my eval and that I think he's going to be a core 4 special teams guy. He's going to be a starter for you on kickoff, on kickoff return, punt, and punt return. And, like most tight ends, well, he doesn't necessarily have the length to play wing on field goal. But again, this guy's dynamic, and it's crazy because he had to share the load, and sometimes he was the third tight end in some of their packages. And man, like you watch the tape, and as you're clicking through the plays where he's not in, it was one of those things where you're trying to find him on the screen or try to find a player on the screen. And when he's out there, you find him instantly, just in the way he looks, the way he moves. And it's like, this guy's different. So like I said, with Max Klare, if we didn't have this guy on the list, Max Klare would have easily been the guy that I was most excited about at this position. But man, like, I'm so excited to see him this year, see Kenyon Sadiq this year, and what he's going to do. And there's an argument that he may be the best player in the program right now. So we'll see.
By the way, just as an aside, a little peek behind the curtain, when you talk about finding players on tape, shout out to TCU for wearing black on black with the uniforms and the numbers. I have no idea who's running out there. I'm squinting and having to pause, and it takes me 3 times as long to find what I'm looking for. But in terms of Sadiq, here's something else that I wrote, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I said he was more like a running back with the ball in his hands. They use him all the time on jet sweeps and end arounds, little tap passes, and he consistently gets to the corner. Talk about some of the juice that he has. And here's something else that I put in my notes that might make you fall off your chair. I said, for some reason, he reminds me of Kadarius Toney in the quick game, and then Anquan Bolden in space, because he's just trucking guys once he gets going down the field. I don't know if I've ever mentioned, or anyone's ever mentioned, Kadarius and Anquan in the same sentence, but that's sort of my aggregate comp for Kenyon Sadiq.
It's funny you say that, because Anquan and I, we came out of high school the same year, and we were on a college visit together. And no one thought of Anquan as being a vertical speed guy. His name of his game was obviously the physicality and that stuff, but he had really good change of direction and just being able to stick that foot in the ground. And in Florida, we call it a dub step. And we called it dub after Pete Dub, is Peter Ward, because that was his calling card, being able to stick that foot in the ground. And both Anquan and Kadarius Toney have that, and so it's funny that you mentioned that. And I get the reference of how you can bring those two together where most may miss it. But man, like this kid, he has a bright future, and I don't know who Oregon's quarterback is going to be this year. But there's going to be so much pressure on that young man to try to figure out how he's going to get this guy the ball and allow this guy to really explode.
Yeah, and the other thing is, we didn't get an opportunity to talk about Evan Stewart, the wide receiver at Oregon, who returned to school because he got injured a month or so ago, and his 2025 season is now in doubt. So it could be a situation where we're seeing more of Kenyon than we had originally hoped. The other thing to keep in mind is this, and you obviously know this better than I do. There's some guys we haven't talked about who we haven't watched and probably don't know their names, who are going to end up creeping up on this list as we get through the draft process. Because if I've learned anything from Tyler Warren, who we knew about a year ago, is that if you time it right and you are dominating, people are gonna know who you are. So how is that process? Like, how do those guys come on your radar as a GM when you have a million things to concern yourself with? Like Tyler Warren, for example, are you hearing about him in September, October, November during these draft meetings? How does that work?
I mean, you have your lieutenants, whether it's your VP of personnel, your director of player personnel, your assistant GM. They're in constant communication with the scouts, and you give them the freedom to kind of phone back into the office and let us know guys that they're excited about in their areas, and then you just base it off of knowing who that scout is and their certain level of passion for the guy, and from there you create your own list and you start combing through some of those guys.
All right, before we get out of here, I'll ask you this: more productive as a rookie, Colson Loveland with the Caleb Williams All-Stars, or Tyler Warren with we don't know who the quarterback might be in Indianapolis?
Give me Tyler Warren.
Oh, sleeper. All right, I'll go with Colson and the Caleb's. All right, that's it for us here with the first pick. Tight end, consensus ranking, summer scouting. Next Thursday, or next Friday, excuse me, we'll talk about offensive line. And then next week, we're doing the defense. Check out With the First Pick wherever you get your podcast. Scan that QR code. See you guys later.